You know what finally pushed me over the edge with modern finishes? I spent 3 weekends building a white oak bookcase for my daughter. Took my time with it, got the joinery just right, and then I brushed on 2 coats of polyurethane like I always did. It looked fine at first, shiny even, protected, but 6 months later it had already started yellowing. And when you ran your hand across it, it felt like plastic, not like wood, like I had wrapped the whole thing in cellophane. That's when I started digging into how furniture was finished before all these synthetic products took over. And what I found surprised me more than I expected. Medieval monks, the same men who built some of the most beautiful furniture in European history, were finishing wood with nothing but plants, beeswax, and natural oils. And their pieces didn't just survive. They developed this deep, warm glow that actually got better with age. Today I'm going to walk you through 7 of their finishing techniques that most modern woodworkers have completely forgotten. And stick around to the end, because I'll show you a specific wax buffing method I picked up that completely changed how I apply finish to any project. Let's get into it. What we're really talking about here is a finishing philosophy that treats wood as a living material, not something to be sealed away under a plastic shell. These Abbey methods are not primitive, they're sophisticated, they're intentional, and for anyone who's tired of finishes that look lifeless or break down after a few years, they're worth every minute of your attention. So let me start with where all of this comes from. The monks I'm talking about were primarily Benedictine and Cistercian orders, working from roughly the 8th century through the 15th century, across England, France, Germany, and parts of Italy. Now, these weren't hobbyists. The rule of St. Benedict, which governed daily life in these monasteries, required manual labor as a form of devotion. Every monk worked with his hands, and woodworking was one of the most essential trades in any abbey. They built everything themselves. Choir stalls, refectory tables that seated 40 or 50 men, massive library shelving, lecterns, storage chests, and all of it was expected to last not just years, but generations, because replacing things was wasteful, and waste was a sin. Here's what really struck me when I started studying this. These monks sourced nearly everything locally. The beeswax came from their own apiaries. The plant dyes came from monastery gardens where they grew madderroot, weld, and elderberry, alongside their medicinal herbs. The oils came from walnut trees and flax crops they cultivated on abbey lands. They weren't buying finishing products. They were making them from what the land provided. And because of that, they understood their materials at a level most of us never reach. They knew how walnut oil behaved differently in winter versus summer. They knew which wax worked best on oak versus beech. Everything was observed, tested, and refined over centuries. When I finally got to examine a piece of surviving abbey furniture in person, a 15th century oak choir stall, the patina on that wood was unlike anything I've ever seen come out of a spray can. It had depth, it had warmth, and it was 600 years old. That's when I knew I had to learn how they did it. The first technique is one of the simplest and one of the most effective. The monks used black walnut hulls to create a rich, warm brown dye that penetrates deep into wood fibers without obscuring the grain. This is completely different from modern oil-based stains that sit on the surface and can look blotchy, especially on woods like cherry or maple. Here's how they did it. They collected the green outer hulls of black walnuts in early autumn, crushed them, and soaked them in water for 2 to 3 weeks. The liquid turns a deep, dark brown. You strain it through linen, cloth, and what you have is a pure, natural dye that bonds with the wood at a cellular level. I tried this on a piece of European beech, which is notoriously difficult to stain evenly with modern products. The walnut hull dye went on beautifully. No blotching, no lap marks. Just this warm, honest brown that looked like the wood had aged naturally over decades. The key is that this is a true dye, not a pigmented stain. It doesn't fill the pores or mask the figure. It changes the color of the wood itself. You can apply multiple coats to deepen the tone, letting each coat dry for about 12 hours before the next. 3 coats on white oak gives you a color that rivals any expensive commercial stain I've ever used. The second technique is the foundation of Abbey finishing, and it's the one that made me rethink everything I thought I knew about protecting wood. Pure beeswax dissolved in natural gum turpentine. That's it. No polyurethane, no lacquer, no varnish. The monks mixed roughly 1 part beeswax to 4 parts turpentine by volume. You gently heat the beeswax in a double boiler until it melts. Then stir in the turpentine and let it cool to a soft paste. What you get is a finish that feeds the wood instead of sealing it. Here's why that matters. Polyurethane creates a hard film on the surface. It looks glossy at first, but it prevents the wood from breathing. Over time it yellows, it chips, it peels. And when it fails, you have to strip the entire piece and start over. The monk's beeswax polish does the opposite. It absorbs into the wood fibers, enhances the natural color, and creates a soft, warm sheen that you can renew anytime just by applying another thin coat. I've been using this on my own projects for about 3 years now, and the difference is remarkable. The wood feels alive under your hand. And here's the part that really convinced me. Modern polyurethane off-gases volatile organic compounds for weeks after application. The beeswax and turpentine? Polish? Once the turpentine evaporates, which takes about 24 hours in a well-ventilated space, you're left with nothing but pure beeswax on wood. No toxins, no chemicals, no plastic. By the way, if you are enjoying learning about these old-world methods, I put together something I think you will really appreciate. It is called The Lost Workshop, and it is a complete guide to hand tool woodworking the way medieval craftsmen actually did it. 156 pages, 17 chapters, 33 illustrations. Techniques like the ones we are covering today, and a whole lot more. You can grab your copy by scanning the QR code on screen, or just use the first link in the description. All right, let us keep going. The third technique is something the monks always did before applying wax, and it's a step most of us skip entirely. They saturated the wood with cold-pressed linseed oil first, not the boiled linseed oil you find at the hardware store, which contains metallic drying agents and chemical solvents. True cold-pressed linseed oil, straight from flax seeds, with nothing added. They would apply a generous coat with a linen rag, let it soak in for about 30 minutes, then wipe off the excess. After 24 hours of drying, they'd apply a second coat, sometimes a third. The oil penetrates deep into the wood fibers and polymerizes slowly over days, creating a flexible, durable foundation that deepens the wood's natural color and gives the beeswax something to bond to. When I first tried this sequence, oil first then wax, on a cherry tabletop, the difference was immediately obvious. The color had a richness and depth that wax alone couldn't achieve. The grain seemed to glow from within instead of just sitting on the surface. If you try this, look for cold-pressed or raw linseed oil from a woodworking supplier, not the hardware store variety. The difference matters. The fourth technique opened my eyes to a world of color I didn't know was possible with natural materials. The monks maintained gardens specifically for dye plants, and they use these to tint wood in ways that look nothing like modern chemical stains. Elderberry juice produces a beautiful silvery purple gray that's stunning on lighter woods like ash or maple. Madder root simmered in water for about an hour yields a warm, earthy red that's perfect for accenting details on cherry or walnut. Weld, a common European plant, gives you a clear golden yellow, and oak galls, those small round growths you find on oak trees, produce a dark iron-toned black when mixed with a small amount of iron, like a rusty nail soaked in vinegar. Each of these dyes is water-based, so it raises the grain slightly. The monks would dampen the wood first, let it dry, then lightly smooth it before applying the dye. That way, the grain raising was already done and the final surface stayed smooth. What I love about these dyes is how they age. Modern stains fade unevenly and can shift to unpleasant tones after a few years. These plant-based dyes mellow and warm over time, developing character instead of deteriorating. The fifth technique is one I never would have believed if I hadn't tried it myself. The monks used beaten egg whites as an end grain sealer. End grain absorbs finish at a completely different rate than face grain, which is why so many projects end up with dark, blotchy ends. The monks would whisk egg whites until frothy, then brush a thin coat onto the end grain and let it dry completely. The protein in the egg white fills the open pores just enough to equalize absorption without creating a visible film. When you then apply your oil and wax, the end grain takes finish at nearly the same rate as the face grain. I tried this on a white oak cutting board, and honestly, I felt a little foolish brushing egg whites onto wood, but the result spoke for itself. The end grain matched the face grain almost perfectly after oiling. It's one of those techniques that sounds too simple to work until you see it. The sixth technique is one of the most dramatic. The monks discovered, probably by accident, that oak darkens beautifully when exposed to ammonia fumes. In the Abbey, this likely happened when oak furniture was stored near stables where horse urine produced natural ammonia. The chemistry is straightforward. Oak contains a high concentration of tannins, and those tannins react with ammonia gas to produce a deep, rich brown that penetrates well below the surface. This isn't a surface treatment. The color goes into the wood. You can do this safely today using common household ammonia. Place your oak piece inside a sealed plastic tent or large garbage bag along with a shallow dish of ammonia. Don't let the liquid touch the wood. Just let the fumes do the work. After 24 to 48 hours, depending on how dark you want the result, you'll have a color that no chemical stain can replicate. It's deep, and because the reaction happens within the wood fibers, it won't fade or wear off. When I fumed a set of white oak drawer fronts, the transformation was remarkable. A warm, deep brown with beautiful figure that looked like the wood had aged 100 years. The seventh technique came later in monastic history, closer to the 14th and 15th centuries, but it builds beautifully on everything else. This is the early form of what we now call French Polish. Monks dissolved shellac, a natural resin secreted by the lac beetle, in alcohol to create a thin liquid finish. They applied it using a pad made from linen wrapped around a ball of wool, with a single drop of linseed oil on the surface to lubricate the pad's movement. The technique involves building dozens of paper-thin layers using small circular motions, letting each layer dry before adding the next. It demands patience. A proper French polish might take 3 or 4 sessions over several days, but the result is a finish with a depth and clarity that no spray lacquer can touch. Light seems to enter the wood and bounce back at you from within. I'll be honest, this one took me several attempts to get right. The pad has to be loaded correctly, the pressure has to be consistent, and you can't rush it. But once I finally got a good result on an English walnut jewelry box, I understood why this technique survived for centuries. Nothing else looks like it. Now let me share some patterns I've noticed over the years. Things I used to do myself that these monks handled completely differently. The first pattern is defaulting to polyurethane for everything. Most of us reach for it because it's easy and it's what we know. But the monks teach us that protection doesn't require a plastic barrier. Wax and oil provide real protection while letting the wood breathe and age gracefully. The second pattern is applying stain without understanding penetration. We brush on stain and hope for the best. The monks prepared their wood carefully, raised, and smoothed the grain and used true dyes that bond with the fibers rather than sitting on top. The third pattern is using one thick coat instead of many thin layers. Every Abbey technique I studied is built on patience and layering. Thin coats of oil, thin coats of wax, thin layers of shellac. The depth comes from accumulation, not from one heavy application. The fourth pattern is treating finish as a one-time event. The monks maintained their furniture throughout its life. A fresh coat of wax once or twice a year kept pieces looking beautiful for centuries. We tend to finish a project, put it in the house, and never touch it again until the finish fails. Once you recognize these patterns in your own work, you can start shifting your approach one project at a time. Now for that bonus tip I promised at the beginning. This is something I learned from reading about Benedictine furniture restoration practices, and it changed how I apply wax to every project. Instead of buffing wax with a cotton cloth the way most of us do, try using a tightly woven linen cloth and the heat from your own hand. Linen has a much finer texture than cotton, and it doesn't leave fibers behind. But here's the real trick. After applying a thin coat of your beeswax polish, let it sit for about 15 minutes. Then fold your linen cloth into a tight pad, press it flat against the surface with your palm, and use long, firm strokes with steady pressure. The friction from your hand generates just enough warmth to soften the wax slightly as you buff, driving it deeper into the pores and creating a sheen that cotton buffing simply cannot match. The first time I tried this on an oiled and waxed oak panel, the surface went from a nice matte glow to something that genuinely looked like it was lit from within. It takes about 10 minutes of steady buffing for a tabletop, but the result is worth every second. Before we wrap up, if today's video taught you something new, imagine having 100 techniques like this at your fingertips. That is exactly what the Lost Workshop is. It is my complete guide to medieval hand tool woodworking, all in one place, with 17 chapters, 33 illustrations, and 156 pages of clear instructions. You can get your copy by scanning the QR code on screen or using the link in the description. Thanks for being here. Subscribe if you have not yet, and I will see you next time.